March 15, 1951, 2:47 a.m. A radio engineer in San Francisco picked up a signal that shouldn't exist, a U.S. Navy distress code from a station that had been silent since December 1942. The frequency was dead. The equipment was presumed destroyed. The men who operated it were listed as killed in Seki action, but there it was, cutting through the static like a voice from the grave. 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, SOS, and then something more, a location, a name, a message that had been waiting 9 years to be heard. The Pacific War left behind more than sunken ships and rusted helmets. It left mysteries buried in coral sand and hidden in the frequencies between stations. Some were never meant to be found. Others were designed to outlast the men who built them. This is the story of Station Echo 7, a radio outpost that refused to die, and the engineer who discovered why it dead. Frequency suddenly came back to life. Before we dive deeper into this mystery, take a moment to subscribe, because every week we uncover the forgotten stories of how human ingenuity survived the impossible, one frequency at a time. The year was 1942, and the Pacific had become an ocean of static and fear. After Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy scrambled to establish a chain of radio stations across remote islands, each one a vital link in the intelligence network that would either save or doom American forces in the Pacific. These weren't military bases with concrete bunkers and anti-aircraft guns. They were skeleton crews of 3 to 5 men, armed with nothing but transmitters, code books, and the knowledge that when the Japanese came, and they would come, there would be no rescue. Station Echo 7 sat on an unnamed atoll 400 miles southeast of Guadalcanal. From the air it looked like nothing. A few palm trees, a strip of white sand barely wider than a football field. But beneath those palms, Radio Man First Class Thomas Barrett and his team had built something extraordinary, using salvaged parts from a crashed B-17, storage batteries from a sunken transport ship, and ingenuity. Born from desperation, they'd constructed a transmission system that could reach Pearl Harbor on a clear night. More importantly, they'd hidden it so well that even if the island fell, the equipment might survive. Barrett was 23 years old, from a small town in Iowa, where the biggest technical achievement was getting the grain elevator to run through harvest season. But war has a way of turning farm boys into engineers, and Barrett had discovered he had a gift for making broken things sing. His commander once said Barrett could make a radio out of coconut shells and good intentions. He'd need every ounce of that talent for what was coming. The Japanese invasion fleet was spotted on December 8, 1942, at dawn. 17 ships moving in formation, their guns already trained on the tiny speck of land that held Echo 7. Barrett had 4 hours, maybe less. Protocol was clear: destroy the equipment, burn the code books, and surrender or die fighting. But Barrett had spent 6 months on this forgotten piece of coral, 6 months perfecting a system that had saved American lives by intercepting Japanese transmissions and relaying positions of enemy submarines. He couldn't bring himself to destroy it all. Working with Seaman Paul Kovacs and signalman James Chen, Barrett made a decision that violated every protocol in the book. Instead of destroying the main transmitter, they would bury it. Not just bury it, they would create what Barrett called a Phoenix system, equipment that could survive underground, protected from salt, moisture, and time, waiting for someone to find it or, and this is where Barrett's plan became almost delusional in its ambition, waiting to transmit again on its own. The idea was insane. Electronics and tropical moisture don't mix. Sand corrodes everything. And even if the equipment survived, what power source could possibly last years underground? But Barrett had been experimenting with something he'd read about in a radio news magazine from 1938, a chemical battery system using local materials that could theoretically provide tiny amounts of power for extended periods. Combined with a timer mechanism salvaged from aerial bombs and wrapped in rubber from life rafts, he believed he could create a transmitter that would sleep underground and wake years later. They had 3 hours now. While Kovacs stood watch and Chen prepared the visible equipment for destruction, the decoy that would convince the Japanese the station was dead, Barrett worked in a natural cave formation he'd discovered months earlier, 20 feet inland from the beach, hidden beneath a fallen palm trunk. Using waterproof containers meant, for shipping medical supplies, he sealed the compact transmitter, the timer mechanism, and his jury-rigged battery system. The antenna was the masterpiece, a thin copper wire woven through the root system of the palms above. invisible from the surface but capable of transmitting if everything else worked. The timer was set for 9 years. Why 9? Barrett never lived to explain, but Kovac, who survived the war in a POW camp, later said Barrett believed that was how long it would take for the war to end and for someone to come looking for answers. It was also the maximum time Barrett calculated his chemical batteries might last in perfect conditions. Everything had to align perfectly. Temperature, moisture, the chemical reaction proceeding at exactly the right rate. The odds were astronomical against it working. At 11:43 a.m., Barrett transmitted his final official message. Echo 7 to Pearl. Enemy landing imminent. Destroying equipment per protocol. Tell my mother. The transmission cut off there. The Japanese landed 20 minutes later. The official record states that radioman First Class Thomas Barrett was killed defending his post. Seaman Kovac was captured. Signalman Chen's body was never found. The Japanese reported finding destroyed radio equipment and no intelligence of value. Station Echo 7 was marked as eliminated, its frequency retired, its mission ended. For 9 years, that was the end of the story. Ray Hoffman was the kind of engineer who heard music in static and saw patterns in chaos. Working the night shift at RCA's monitoring station in San Francisco, he spent his breaks scanning dead frequencies, listening for Soviet signals, unusual atmospheric bounces, anything that might indicate new technology or communication methods. He called it fishing in the electromagnetic spectrum, and on March 15, 1951, he caught something impossible. The signal was weak, barely distinguishable from the cosmic background noise that filled the abandoned frequency of Echo 7, but Hoffman had been doing this for 12 years. He knew the difference between random static and intentional transmission. This was intentional. 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots. The international distress signal, transmitted in U.S. Navy protocol from a station that had been dead since 1942. Hoffman's first thought was that someone was playing a prank, or that atmospheric conditions were creating a skip echo from another station. But then the signal continued, and what came next made his blood run cold. In Morse code, clear despite the weakness of the signal, came coordinates, the exact location of station Echo 7, then a name, Barrett, then a series of numbers that Hoffman recognized as a Navy authentication code, the kind that would have been classified in 1942. The signal lasted exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Then it stopped, cutting off mid-transmission just as Barrett's final message had 9 years earlier. Hoffman recorded everything, checked his equipment twice, and called his supervisor. Within 6 hours, his recording was in the hands of Naval Intelligence. The Navy's reaction was swift and secretive. Hoffman was ordered to discuss the signal with no one and to monitor that frequency continuously. 3 days later, a team was dispatched to the coordinates, the unnamed atoll that had once held Echo 7. What they found there defied explanation and challenged everything they thought they knew about Barrett's final hours. The island had been abandoned since 1942. The Japanese had left it after, stripping anything of value, and it had remained uninhabited, slowly being reclaimed by nature. The team found the remnants of the station, concrete foundations overgrown with vines, rusted metal scattered in the sand, the graves of 3 Japanese soldiers who had apparently been left behind and died there. But following Hoffman's coordinates and Barrett's detailed notes, found in his personal effects that his mother had donated to the Navy, they discovered the cave. Pause. 15,000 characters reached. Say, okay to continue. Tentar novamente guk. The entrance had been sealed with coral rocks and covered by 9 years of growth, but it was there exactly where Barrett's notes indicated. Inside, wrapped in medical supply containers and preserved beyond any reasonable expectation, they found the transmitter. But it wasn't just preserved, it had been transmitting. The timer mechanism had triggered exactly as Barrett designed. The chemical batteries had provided just enough power for one brief transmission, and the antenna woven through the palm roots had carried Barrett's final message across 4,000 miles of ocean to Hoffman's receiver in San Francisco. The technical team that examined Barrett's creation called it impossible engineering under impossible conditions. The chemical battery system used a combination of seawater, copper from stripped wire, zinc from equipment casings, and a catalyst Barrett had created from local plant enzymes, something he'd apparently been experimenting with for months before the invasion. The timer was mechanical, requiring no power to count down, using temperature expansion and contraction to slowly advance toward its trigger point. The transmitter itself had been modified to use minimal power while maximizing range, with hand wound coils that Barrett had calculated to perfection. But the real genius was in the redundancy. Barrett had created 3 separate systems, each sealed independently. If one failed, the others could still function. The one that had transmitted to Hoffman was the second system. The first had apparently triggered years earlier when no one was listening. The third was still intact, its timer showing it would have triggered in 1954. Inside the first container, wrapped in waxed canvas, they found something else. A complete log of Japanese transmissions that Barrett had intercepted in his final days. Intelligence that would have been invaluable in 1942, but more personally they found letters. One to his mother, one to his commanding officer, and one addressed to whoever finds this. The letter read, "If you're reading this, then it worked. I couldn't let Echo 7 die silent. We picked up transmissions here that saved American lives. Maybe the war's over now. Maybe we won. Maybe we lost. But as long as there was a chance this equipment could send one more signal, report one more position, save one more life, I had to try. Tell them we held our post. Tell them Echo 7 transmitted until the end. And if somehow this message reaches home, tell my mother I used everything she taught me about never giving up. Radio stations don't die. They just wait for someone to tune in again." Thomas Barrett, Radio Man First Class, December 8, 1942. The Navy's investigation revealed that Barrett's phantom transmission had done more than just announce its presence. The authentication codes and coordinates he'd embedded contained intelligence about Japanese positions from 1942, information that, when cross-referenced with other historical data, revealed the location of 2 sunken American submarines that had been listed as lost at unknown positions. The families of 127 sailors finally learned where their loved ones had been laid to rest. Ray Hoffman was quietly awarded a civilian commendation for his discovery. He continued monitoring dead frequencies until his retirement in 1967, but he never heard anything like the Echo 7 signal again. In interviews years later, he said, "Barrett built more than a radio. He built a time machine, a message in a bottle that used electromagnetic waves instead of ocean currents. Every time I scan the static now, I wonder what other voices are out there, waiting for the right moment to be heard." The technical details of Barrett's Phoenix system were classified for 30 years. When finally released, they inspired a generation of emergency beacon designs and influenced the development of long-duration battery systems for space missions. NASA engineers studying the documents in the 1960s noted that Barrett's power calculations were remarkably similar to those they were using for lunar equipment that needed to survive years in dormancy. One engineer wrote in the margins of Barrett's notes, "This kid figured out in a cave what took us 10 years in a lab." But the most remarkable discovery came in 1973, when Seaman Paul Kovach, who had survived 3 years in a Japanese POW camp, was finally tracked down, living in Minnesota. He revealed that Barrett had actually tested his system months before the invasion, successfully, transmitting a signal after burying equipment for 30 days. Barrett had told him, "If we can make it work for a month, we can make it work for a decade. It's not about the power lasting. It's about building something that refuses to give up." Kovach also revealed the reason for the 9-year NBR timer. Barrett had calculated that it would take approximately 4 years for the war to end, another 3 years for the military to declassify and investigate old mysteries, and 2 more years for technology to advance enough that someone might be randomly monitoring dead frequencies with sensitive enough equipment to catch a weak signal. He had been off by just 6 months. The island that held Station Echo 7 is still uninhabited today. The Navy installed a small memorial in 1952, a simple brass plaque that reads, "Station Echo 7, December 1942. They held their post." But sailors passing through that area of the Pacific report something strange. On certain nights when atmospheric conditions are just right, radio operators pick up phantom signals on the old Echo 7 frequency. Not messages, just carrier waves like the station is still breathing, still ready to transmit if called upon. Modern engineers have tried to recreate Barrett's Phoenix system using 1942 technology. Even with detailed notes and perfect conditions, only 1 in 10 attempts has succeeded in transmitting after 9 months, let alone 9 years. The chemical composition of Barrett's batteries remains partially a mystery. He referenced using local ingredients that he never fully documented, taking that secret to his grave on the beach of Echo 7. The last person to officially investigate the Echo 7 phenomenon was Dr. Sarah Chen, a descendant of signalman James Chen, in 2001. Using ground-penetrating radar, she discovered that Barrett had actually built 5 systems, not 3. 2 remain buried on the island, their timers and purposes unknown. The Navy declined to excavate them, officially stating that they should remain as a memorial. Unofficially, some suggest they're afraid of what messages might still be waiting to transmit. Dr. Chen's research revealed one final detail that had been overlooked. In Barrett's personal effects, she found a book, The Boy Mechanic, 700 Things for Boys to Do, published in 1938. Inside, young Tommy Barrett had written notes in the margins, ideas about perpetual motion, endless energy, and machines that could outlive their makers. Next to a chapter on simple batteries, he'd written, "What if something could wait forever to deliver its message? What if machinery could be more patient than men?" The answer came on a December night in 1942, when a 23-year-old farm boy from Iowa looked at his radio equipment, looked at the approaching Japanese fleet, and decided that Station Echo 7 would not go silent. Not in 9 years. Not ever. He built something that transcended its components, copper wire and zinc plates and acid, from plants that grew in coral sand. He built determination itself into circuits and timers, creating a machine that inherited his refusal to surrender. Ray Hoffman kept a photo of Barrett on his desk for the rest of his life. In his final interview before his death in 1981, he said, "We think of heroes as the ones who charge into battle, who fly the planes and sail the ships, but sometimes the greatest heroism is in the ones who stay behind, who keep the lights on and the signals flowing." Barrett knew he was going to die on that island, but he also knew that his message didn't have to die with him. In the end, that's all any of us can hope for, that something we build will speak for us after we're gone. The RCA monitoring station where Hoffman worked was demolished in 1989, but before it came down, engineers noticed something curious. Someone had carved coordinates into one of the concrete foundations, the exact location of Station Echo 7. Below it, in Morse code, dots and dashes carefully etched into stone. Still listening. Today, Barrett's Phoenix system sits in the National Electronics Museum, still sealed in its original waterproof container. The curator says that on quiet nights when the museum is empty, they swear they can hear it humming, not with electricity but with potential, as if it's still counting down to something, as if Barrett's 9-year timer was just the beginning of a longer countdown that we don't yet understand. The Navy still monitors the Echo 7 frequency. Officially, it's part of spectrum management, ensuring old frequencies remain clear for potential reuse. Unofficially, there's a standing order that any signal detected on that frequency is to be immediately reported and recorded. Since 1951, there have been 17 unexplained transmissions on that frequency. Each one has contained verifiable intelligence from World War II that was previously unknown. Each one has been exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds long. Each one has ended with the same words in Morse. Echo 7 still operational. If stories like this remind you that human ingenuity can outlast human life, that messages can transcend time, and that sometimes the greatest engineering is born from desperate determination, then subscribe now, because every week we uncover another story of how builders and makers refused to let their creations fall. Silent, they built it to survive 9 years of silence, but it became something more, proof that what we create with purpose and passion can speak long after we're gone, carrying our voices across impossible distances, through impossible odds, to find exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. Barrett didn't just build a radio that could survive. He built a radio that could hope. And 9 years later, that hope found its frequency, found its listener, and proved that some signals never truly die. They just wait in the static for someone who knows how to listen. Station Echo 7 went silent on December 8, 1942, but in truth it never stopped transmitting.